All right, so we're diving deep today into irritable bowel syndrome. You've brought a whole stack of info. There's stuff from the NHS website, a pamphlet from the Digestive Health Foundation,
Yeah.
and even a handout from the American Neurogastroenterology and Motility Society.
Wow, that's quite the collection. The A team of IBS resources right here.
Exactly. It's pretty clear you want to understand this condition,
Mm.
and I gotta say, it's a good choice. IBS is super common,
Mm-hmm.
but there are so many myths and misconceptions.
It's true. It can be a bit of a confusing landscape to navigate.
Totally.
Oh, yeah.
So whether you're dealing with IBS yourself, know someone who is, or just want to be informed,
Right.
we're going to break it all down,
Absolutely.
separating facts from fiction.
Sounds good. Let's start with some basics. IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, is a chronic condition,
Okay.
which basically means it's ongoing. But importantly, it doesn't develop into other more serious diseases.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, it's not a stepping stone to something worse.
So it's like contained to the gut itself,
Oh,
right?
right.
All those classic IBS things,
Mm.
stomach cramps, bloating,
Mm-hmm.
that whole uncomfortable picture.
Exactly. It's focused on the digestive system.
Gotcha. But, the NHS stuff mentions it being a lifelong problem.
Right.
And honestly, that sounds a bit scary. Like, am I stuck with this forever if I have it?
Well, the lifelong bit can be a little misleading. It is long-term, yes, but problem might be a bit strong.
Okay.
See, IBS is more about flare-ups. Symptoms aren't constant. They come and go.
Oh, so it's not like a never-ending stomach ache.
Not at all. It's more like waves.
Okay.
Instead of a constant storm, you get these periods of calm and then, maybe some rough seas.
That's a good way to put it. So it's manageable.
Definitely. There's no magic cure, but with the right approach, people with IBS can live totally normal lives.
Really? So what does that right approach look like?
Well, we're talking diet changes, maybe some medication, just
Uh-huh.
strategies to kind of smooth out those waves.
So it's about controlling the symptoms, not necessarily eliminating the condition itself.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's talk about those symptoms.
Sure.
Because the sources list a bunch. Abdominal pain, bloating, changes in bowel movements.
Mm.
We're talking everything from diarrhea to constipation.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the digestive system is going haywire.
Yeah, it can feel that way. And that's what makes IBS tricky. It's not one size fits all.
Right.
Some people have it way milder than others.
So more like a spectrum than a single point.
Precisely. Some folks, it's just an occasional annoyance, and others, it can really disrupt their lives. And to make it even more interesting,
Oh.
this little detail in the Digestive Health Foundation pamphlet caught my eye.
What's that?
They point out that symptoms can actually worsen before a woman's period.
Hold on. So hormones are in the mix.
It definitely suggests there's a link, which just adds another layer to the complexity of IBS.
Wow, that is interesting. So I got to ask,
Mm.
what causes all this in the first place?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Because reading these sources, it feels like they all kind of dance around the answer. Like there's not a single IBS bug they found, right?
You're exactly right. The precise cause is still a mystery. But think of it like this. We're detectives,
Okay.
and we've got clues, things that seem to trigger or worsen symptoms.
Okay, I like that. So what are some of our prime suspects then?
Well, the IBS pamphlet calls them triggers, and some are pretty surprising. For example, did you know that sometimes IBS develops after someone's had gastroenteritis?
Wait, so like a stomach bug could actually lead to IBS?
It's a bit like the gut gets thrown off balance and can't quite recover.
Huh, that's
It
wild.
doesn't happen to everyone, but it's definitely on the radar.
Okay, so past infections, they're one suspect. What else are we looking at?
Well, food intolerances are a big one. Lactose, fructose, sorbitol, those can all stir up trouble.
Food, huh? That makes sense with all the diet advice out there for IBS.
Absolutely. And then there's a big one, the one we all kind of knew was coming, stress.
Yeah. Yes. The mind-gut connection. And it seems like every health problem these days comes back to stress, though. Does it really affect IBS that much?
More than you might think. It's not just a case of butterflies in your stomach.
Right.
When we're stressed, our bodies pump out these hormones,
Okay.
and they can directly impact the nerves and muscles in our intestines.
So it's not just in our heads then.
Nope. It's a real physical response happening in our guts.
Wow. So stress basically sends a signal straight to our gut, messing things up.
Exactly. And, certain medications can be triggers too, especially ones that affect bowel movements. Always a good idea to check with your doctor if you think your meds might be playing a role.
So we've got infections, food sensitivities, stress, meds. It's like a whole web of potential culprits.
It is, and that makes diagnosis a little tricky. There's no single test that says, boom, you've got IBS.
Oh, so it's not that straightforward.
Not really. It's more about ruling other things out and looking for patterns in your symptoms.
Yeah.
Your doctor will ask a lot of questions about your symptoms, your medical history. They might suggest tests, blood tests, stool tests, maybe even an endoscopy or colonoscopy in some cases.
So it's a process.
It is.
And once you do get a diagnosis, are there different types of IBS?
Oh, absolutely. It's not a one-size-fits-all diagnosis. The handout from the American Neurogastroenterology and Motility Society actually breaks IBS down into 3 main subtypes.
Interesting. Lay it on me.
So there's IBS-C, which is constipation predominant,
Okay.
IBS-D, which is diarrhea predominant,
Right.
and then IBS-M for mixed, where you kind of get a bit of both.
So you could have completely different bowel issues and still have the same underlying condition.
Exactly.
That's wild. It really highlights just how diverse IBS can be. But
Mhm.
how do you even begin to manage something that complex? Where do you even start?
That's a great question, and it's actually a perfect place to pick up next time. So when it comes to managing IBS, it's less about finding a cure and more about finding what works for you. Managing those waves we talked about.
Okay, so less about fixing it, more about surfing those waves. So what did that actually look like? Are we talking bland diets and like avoiding stress forever?
No, not at all. It's not about deprivation. There are definitely things you can do with diet, stress management, and yeah, sometimes medication is part of the picture, but it's more about making smart choices.
All right, I'm intrigued. Where do we start? What are the big things to know?
Well, all 3 of our sources, they really emphasize diet, and specifically fiber. The IBS pamphlet actually recommends aiming for 30 grams a day.
30 grams. Whoa, that's a lot. Like,
Mm.
are we talking all brand, all day levels here?
Yeah, it can seem like a lot, but the key is to increase it gradually. Don't want to shock the system.
Right, got to ease into it. But isn't all fiber created equal? I mean, it's not just about bran flakes, right?
Right, exactly. It's about getting fiber from a variety of sources. Think fruits, veggies, whole grains.
Okay, so swaps, not just survival food.
Exactly. Good stuff that actually tastes good.
That's key. But what about those food intolerances we talked about? How do you even figure out what's bothering you? Is it just trial and error? Trial and error can be part of it, yeah. But a food diary can be a super helpful tool.
Oh, like tracking what you eat and how you feel after.
Exactly. Can help you see patterns and maybe pinpoint some culprits. You become a gut detective.
I like that. And if you find a suspect, what then? Just avoid it forever.
Sometimes, yeah. But sometimes it's more nuanced. Your doctor might suggest what's called an elimination diet,
Okay.
where you cut out a suspect food completely, then slowly reintroduce it to see if symptoms come back.
Oh, interesting. So you can really test it out.
Yep. And then there's this term that pops up in our IBS pamphlet, FODMPs.
FODMPs. What in the world are those? Sounds like something out of Star Trek.
Right. It stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. Say that 5 times fast.
I don't even think I can say it once. But seriously, what are they?
They're basically types of carbohydrates.
That some people have trouble digesting. And they can be big-time IBS triggers.
So it's not just about fiber in general, but the type of carbs you're eating.
Exactly. Some carbs are easier on the gut than others.
Gotcha. Okay, so we've tackled diet, but what about stress? It feels like every health issue comes back to stress these days. Is it really that impactful for IBS?
It really is. Remember how we talked about the gut having its own nervous system, like at the second brain?
Yeah.
Well, stress can directly affect that second brain.
Huh. So it's not just like in our heads making us feel worse.
Yeah.
It's an actual physical response in the gut.
Exactly. So managing stress is a key part of managing IBS. The pamphlet even mentions things like meditation, relaxation exercises, even counseling.
Okay.
And here's something interesting. It also mentions cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
CBT. Isn't that more for things like anxiety and depression?
It is, but research is showing that it can actually be super helpful for IBS too. CBT helps you recognize and change negative thought patterns that might be making your symptoms worse.
So it's like rewiring how your brain responds to IBS. That's fascinating.
Right. It really highlights that connection between the mind and the gut. But, sometimes lifestyle changes just aren't enough. And that's where medication comes in.
Yeah, sometimes you need that extra support, that extra tool to manage things.
Absolutely. And there's a whole bunch of medications that target different IBS symptoms. So for diarrhea, there are antidiarrheal meds. And for pain, there are painkillers, antispasmodics to relax those gut muscles. And for constipation, there are laxatives.
So it's finding the right tool for the job. But what about this stuff in the handout from the American Neurogastroenterology and Motility Society? They talk about some newer treatments, right?
Yeah, this is where it gets really exciting. They talk about meds like rifaximin and linaclotide, which are showing some really promising results for IBS. Rifaximin is an antibiotic, and while it's been used for other stuff, studies suggest it might be helpful for IBS-D, the diarrhea dominant type. And linaclotide works a bit differently. It actually increases fluid in the intestines, which helps with both constipation and abdominal pain.
So it's not just about managing symptoms, but potentially addressing some of the underlying causes.
Exactly. And then there's the whole world of probiotics.
Probiotics. I've seen them everywhere, but do they actually do anything for IBS?
The research is still ongoing, but there are some studies that suggest they might help. The idea is that by introducing these beneficial bacteria, you can help restore that balance in your gut microbiome.
Wait, the gut microbiome. Another one of those terms I've heard, but not sure I fully grasp. What is it exactly?
Basically, it's all the bacteria and microorganisms that live in your digestive tract, trillions of them. And we're learning more and more about how important they are for our overall health.
So could an imbalance in these gut bacteria be contributing to IBS?
That's what a lot of the research is pointing to. And that's why there's so much excitement about potential treatments that actually target the microbiome.
Like what kind of treatments?
Well, one that's getting a lot of attention is fecal microbiota transplantation, or FMT.
FMT. That sounds a little intense.
It might sound strange, but it basically involves transferring fecal matter from a healthy donor to someone with IBS.
So like a gut bacteria transplant.
Exactly. It's still experimental for IBS, but early research is looking promising.
Wow.
And then there's this whole potential for personalized medicine, tailoring treatments to your specific genes and gut bacteria.
Personalized medicine for IBS. That sounds futuristic.
It's closer than you think. We're already using genetic testing to identify potential triggers and predict how people might respond to different treatments.
That's incredible. It seems like the future of IBS treatment is all about getting really personal, understanding what makes your IBS your IBS. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I want to come back to the here and now. We've talked about all this amazing research and potential treatments, but for someone struggling with IBS right now, today, what's the takeaway? What are the key things they should remember?
That's such a great question, and it brings us to one of the most important things we need to address: the myths and misconceptions surrounding IBS.
Right, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. Time for some myth busting.
Let's start with a big one. IBS doesn't lead to other, more serious conditions, like bowel cancer. The IBS pamphlet makes that very clear.
Okay, good to know. It's easy to go down those what-if rabbit holes when you're dealing with a chronic condition.
Totally. Another myth. Stress doesn't directly cause IBS. We talked about how it can worsen symptoms, but it's not the root of the problem.
So it's like pouring gasoline on a fire, but not starting the fire itself.
Perfect analogy. And lastly, surgery isn't an option for IBS. The handout from the American Neurogastroenterology and Motility Society is very specific about that.
So it's not a structural problem that you can just fix with a scalpel. It's about managing those symptoms, finding what works for you, which circles back to that personalized treatment idea.
Exactly. And it's exciting to think about what the future holds. Imagine a world where we can look at your gut microbiome, your genes, and say, okay, here's a plan to help you thrive with IBS.
It's like the difference between taking a generic over-the-counter painkiller and having a medication that's designed specifically for you.
I love that analogy, and it really underscores the importance of staying curious, keeping up with research, advocating for yourself.
Because IBS isn't a life sentence. It's a condition that with the right knowledge and tools can be managed.
Absolutely. And remember, while the research is constantly evolving, you have the power to take action today.
Mm-hmm.
Even small changes in your diet, some stress management techniques, simply talking to your doctor, all these things can make a big difference.
It's about taking those first steps, no matter how small they are, and building from there.
And that's really what it comes down to, right? Taking control. Because it's easy to feel like IBS is calling all the shots.
Totally. You get caught up in the symptoms, the discomfort. It feels like you're constantly on defense.
Right, always reacting. But the cool thing about all this information we've gone through, it shows us that IBS is something we can understand. And
Mhm.
when you understand it, you can manage it better.
It's like we went from wandering around lost to having a map and compass.
Exactly. And with those tools, you can start making choices that actually empower you.
Right. So it's not just about surviving IBS, it's about thriving despite it.
Absolutely. So whether it's figuring out your food triggers,
Mhm.
finding ways to chill out,
Mhm.
or talking to your doctor about medication, you can navigate this.
It's finding what works for you, which might be totally different for someone else.
And that's where those new therapies we talked about, they get really interesting.
Yeah, the personalized stuff.
Imagine like analyzing your gut microbiome, looking at your genes, and then saying, okay, this is how you thrive with IBS. A plan built just for you.
Like the difference between a generic painkiller and a prescription tailored to your body.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to stay curious, keep up with the research, be your own advocate.
Because IBS isn't a life sentence. It's a condition that, with the right knowledge and tools, you can absolutely manage.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And while research is constantly evolving, you have the power to take action right now, today.
That's a good point.
Even small changes in your diet, stress management techniques, just talking to your doctor, those things can make a huge difference.
It's about taking that first step, however small, and then building from there.
Absolutely. And never underestimate the power of connecting with others, too. Online support groups, local communities. Sharing your story and hearing from others can be incredibly empowering. You're not alone in this.
So if you're feeling overwhelmed by IBS, remember, there's hope, there's help, and there's a path forward. You got this.
Beautifully said. This has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for listening.